Some invitations arrived to change your life. Others arrived to reveal the life that was hidden from you all along. The envelope was waiting on my apartment floor when I got home just after 7 on a rainy Thursday evening. At first, I almost stepped on it. My mind was somewhere else, buried beneath deadlines, restoration estimates, and the stubborn oil painting that had consumed the last 3 weeks of my life. I kicked off my shoes near the door and bent down to pick up the envelope. It was thick. Heavy. Cream-colored. The kind of stationery people didn't use anymore unless they had money. A lot of money. My name was written across the front in elegant black ink. Claire Bennett. No return address. No company logo. No explanation. Just my name. I stood in the tiny kitchen of my Brooklyn apartment, listening to rain tap against the window while I carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was brief. Ms. Bennett, your expertise is requested for the restoration of several historical artworks located within a private estate. Compensation, $50,000 upon completion of initial assessment. Transportation and accommodations provided. If interested, arrive at the address below by Monday at noon. Everything else will be explained upon arrival. $50,000. I read the number 3 times. Then a fourth. My pulse quickened. The amount was nearly what I earned in 6 months. Maybe more. It felt absurd. Unreal. There was an address at the bottom. Moretti Mansion. I had never heard of it. Yet something about the name lingered in my mind long after I folded the letter. That night, sleep refused to come. I kept staring at the invitation resting on my bedside table. The rain had stopped hours ago, but I could still hear water dripping somewhere outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the elegant handwriting again. $50,000. Private estate. Historical artworks. By Saturday, curiosity had defeated caution. I spent hours researching the property. The results were strangely limited. No website. No public tours. Very few photographs. Just scattered mentions buried in local articles and historical archives. A mansion somewhere north of the city. Owned by the Moretti family for generations. Private. Reclusive. Mysterious. One article described the estate as one of the last untouched Gilded Age properties in New York. Another referred to it simply as the house on the hill. What caught my attention wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't say. Every article seemed incomplete. Like someone had carefully removed pieces from the story. By Sunday evening, I had accepted the offer. I told myself it was because of the money. Because my rent had increased again. Because my student loans weren't going to pay themselves. Because opportunities like this didn't appear every day. But deep down, I knew there was another reason. I wanted answers. Monday arrived wrapped in gray clouds and cold wind. A black luxury SUV waited outside my apartment exactly at 10 o'clock. The driver stepped out and opened the door without saying much. Everything about him was professional. Polite. Controlled. During the 2-hour drive north, the city slowly disappeared behind us. Buildings gave way to forests. Highways became winding roads. Self-service faded. The farther we traveled, the quieter the world became. Then I saw it. The mansion stood atop a distant hill beyond rows of ancient trees. Massive. Silent. Watching. Even from half a mile away, something about it made my stomach tighten. The stone walls looked almost silver beneath the cloudy sky. Tall windows reflected the fading afternoon light. It wasn't beautiful in the way magazines described mansions. It was beautiful the way old secrets are beautiful. Dangerous. Impossible to ignore. As we approached the front gates, I noticed something strange. They were already open. As if someone had been expecting me. As if someone knew exactly when I would arrive. And for the first time since receiving that letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't coming here to restore paintings. I was coming here because someone wanted me to find something. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as the vehicle rolled through the gates and onto a winding driveway lined with towering oak trees. I pressed my forehead lightly against the window, watching branches sway overhead like silent guardians. The mansion seemed to grow larger with every passing second. By the time we stopped in front of the entrance, I felt strangely small. The front doors stood nearly 12 feet high, carved from dark wood polished to a soft shine. Before I could reach for my suitcase, the doors opened. A man in a charcoal suit stepped outside. He appeared to be in his late 60s, with silver hair and a posture so straight it made him seem taller than he was. "Miss Bennett," he said with a polite nod. "Welcome. My name is Walter. I oversee the estate." His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades managing difficult situations. I followed him inside. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and old books. Sunlight filtered through enormous windows, stretching across marble floors that reflected the glow like water. Every surface seemed immaculate. Every detail felt deliberate. Yet beneath the elegance, I sensed something else. Something hidden. Walter led me through a grand hallway filled with paintings and antique furniture. Some pieces looked centuries old. Others were covered beneath protective cloths. "Your accommodations have been prepared," he said. "You may begin your assessment tomorrow morning." "Will I be meeting the owner?" I asked. For the briefest moment, Walter hesitated. "Mr. Moretti has a demanding schedule. If he wishes to meet with you, he will." The answer felt rehearsed. We climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor. My room overlooked acres of forest stretching beyond the property. It was larger than my entire apartment back in Brooklyn. After Walter left, I unpacked a few essentials and wandered to the window. The view should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt watched. Not by a person. By the house itself. As evening settled over the estate, I decided to explore. The mansion seemed endless. Hallways branched into other hallways. Portraits stared down from walls lined with dark paneling. Some faces appeared stern. Others almost sad. I lost track of time wandering through the maze of rooms. Then I noticed something unusual. At the far end of one corridor stood a pair of double doors unlike any others in the mansion. They were painted black. No decorations. No artwork nearby. Just two heavy doors beneath a brass wall sconce. I stepped closer. The handle would not move. Locked. A small plaque mounted beside the frame caught my attention. "East Wing." Nothing more. No explanation. Just two words. "You should not be here." The voice startled me. I turned to find Walter standing several feet behind me. His expression remained polite, but something had changed in his eyes. "I was only looking around," I said. "Of course." He folded his hands neatly in front of him. "Nevertheless, the East Wing remains closed." "Why?" For a second, silence filled the corridor. Even the house seemed to stop breathing. Walter glanced toward the black doors before looking back at me. "Some rooms are better left undisturbed." Then he offered a faint smile. "Dinner will be served at 7. He walked away without another word. I remained standing there long after he disappeared around the corner. My eyes drifted back to the doors. Closed. Silent. Waiting. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly knew one thing with complete certainty. Whatever had brought me to this mansion was hidden somewhere beyond them. I barely touched my dinner that evening. The dining room was magnificent, illuminated by the warm glow of crystal chandeliers that reflected against polished silver and antique glass. A table designed for 20 people held a meal that could have fed twice that number, yet I sat alone at one end with only the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock for company. Every few minutes, my thoughts drifted back to the black doors at the end of the corridor. The East Wing. Some rooms are better left undisturbed. Walter's words echoed in my mind long after dessert had been cleared away. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and fog. I woke earlier than usual and stood by the window watching mist roll across the grounds like a living thing. Somewhere beyond the trees, a fountain splashed softly. Birds called from distant branches. The estate looked peaceful in daylight, but the strange feeling remained. By 8 o'clock, Walter escorted me to a large gallery on the first floor where dozens of paintings waited for evaluation. Some were landscapes. Others were portraits. Most needed cleaning and restoration. It should have been familiar work. Comfortable work. Yet I found myself distracted. The paintings were impressive, but they felt secondary somehow. As if they were not the real reason I had been invited here. I spent most of the morning documenting damage and taking notes. Around noon, I moved to a smaller room connected to the gallery. Several portraits hung along the walls. One in particular caught my attention. The woman in the painting looked to be in her late 20s. She wore a dark blue dress and stood beside a grand staircase. Her expression was calm. Intelligent. There was something strangely familiar about her. I stepped closer. The brushwork was extraordinary. Every detail had been captured with remarkable precision. Then I noticed her eyes. Gray-blue. The exact shade as mine. A chill moved through me. Coincidences happen, I told myself. People resemble each other all the time. Yet I could not look away. The longer I stared, the stranger it felt. Interesting, is it not? The voice came from behind me. Deep. Calm. Controlled. I turned so quickly that my notebook nearly slipped from my hands. The man standing in the doorway was taller than I expected. At least 6'3". Dark hair brushed neatly back. Sharp features. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Everything about him suggested confidence without effort. Authority without explanation. His eyes settled on me with quiet intensity. "You must be Claire Bennett," he said. I nodded. "And you must be Mr. Moretti." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room seemed unusually still. Even the distant sounds of the mansion faded away. "How are you finding the estate?" he asked. "Beautiful," I answered honestly. Although I have the feeling it keeps a great many secrets. Something flickered across his face. Not surprise. Not amusement. Recognition. Then it was gone. Most old houses do. His gaze shifted briefly toward the portrait before returning to me. "I hope you are finding everything you need." "Almost everything." The words escaped before I could stop them. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "Almost?" I hesitated. Then I smiled. I am still trying to understand why someone would pay $50,000 for an assessment that could have been completed by a dozen other restorers. For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps because I wanted the right one. And somehow that answer raised more questions than it solved. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of questions I could not answer. I tried focusing on my work, cataloging damaged frames and documenting layers of aging varnish, but my attention kept drifting back to the portrait and the brief conversation that had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Perhaps because Adrian Moretti never seemed surprised by anything. Not by my questions. Not by my observations. Not even by my presence. It was as though he had expected every moment before it happened. By early evening, a steady rain had begun falling outside. Thin streams of water traced paths down the tall windows while distant thunder rolled across the hills. I remained in the gallery longer than necessary, reviewing my notes beneath the warm glow of antique lamps. That was when I noticed something unusual. Along the lower corner of the portrait's frame, hidden beneath years of dust and discoloration, a tiny metallic glint caught my eye. I leaned closer. Embedded inside the carved wood was a small brass mechanism no larger than a coin. It did not belong there. Frames did not normally contain moving parts. Curiosity tugged at me. I carefully brushed away the dust and pressed against the brass piece. A soft click echoed through the silent room. I froze. Somewhere inside the frame, something had shifted. My heartbeat quickened. Slowly, I examined the back of the painting. A narrow compartment had opened, barely visible unless someone knew where to look. Inside rested a folded piece of yellowed paper. For several seconds I simply stared at it. The paper looked old. Very old. My fingers hesitated before carefully unfolding it. There was no letter. No message. Only a drawing. A rough sketch of a key. Beneath it, written in faded ink, were 3 words. Find the truth. A chill crawled up my spine. The handwriting looked hurried, almost desperate. I turned the paper over. Nothing else. No signature. No date. No explanation. Just the image of a key and those 3 words. Suddenly the gallery felt different. Larger. Quieter. As though the mansion itself had been waiting for me to discover that hidden compartment. I slipped the paper into my notebook and glanced toward the doorway. Empty. Yet I could not shake the feeling that someone had been watching. When I finally left the gallery, the corridors were dimly lit. Rain tapped softly against distant windows. Shadows stretched across the walls beneath flickering sconces. As I walked toward the main staircase, something made me stop. At the far end of the hallway stood a figure. Tall. Motionless. Adrian. He stood near a window overlooking the grounds. The storm outside framed him in silver light. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then his gaze dropped to the notebook in my hand. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked quietly. The question sent a strange sensation through me. Because I had never told him I was searching for anything. I swallowed carefully. I am not sure yet. His expression remained unreadable. Sometimes the answers we seek are not the answers we need. Another distant rumble of thunder rolled through the mansion. Then Adrian turned and disappeared down the corridor. Leaving me alone with a notebook, a hidden drawing, and one terrifying realization. Someone had concealed that message for a reason. And somehow, after all these years, they had expected me to be the one who found it. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while rain whispered against the windows and wind moved through the trees surrounding the estate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the drawing hidden inside the portrait. The key. The message. Find the truth. Around midnight, I finally gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. The mansion felt entirely different after dark. The grand halls that seemed elegant during the day now felt enormous and strangely empty. Shadows stretched across the floors. Antique clocks ticked softly behind closed doors. Somewhere in the distance, old pipes groaned within the walls. I wrapped a sweater around myself and stepped into the corridor. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud against the polished floor. I told myself I was only going for a walk. Yet somehow I found myself moving toward the gallery. The house seemed to guide me there. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. A light was on inside. Not bright. Just a faint golden glow coming from one of the lamps. I knew I had turned everything off before leaving. Slowly, I stepped inside. The room appeared unchanged. Paintings lined the walls. The portrait remained exactly where I had left it. But something felt different. My eyes moved across the room. Then I noticed it. A chair near the far wall had been repositioned. Only a few inches. Barely noticeable. Yet I was certain it had not been there earlier. A cold sensation settled in my chest. Someone had entered the gallery after I left. Someone who knew about the hidden compartment. I crossed the room and checked the frame. The secret compartment remained closed. The drawing was still safely tucked inside my notebook upstairs. Relief washed over me briefly. Then another thought arrived. If someone had been searching for the paper, they would now know it was missing. The realization made me glance over my shoulder. The room was empty. Silent. Yet I could not shake the feeling that eyes were following my every movement. I left the gallery quickly and started back toward the main staircase. Halfway there, I heard something. Footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Somewhere behind me. I stopped. The sound stopped too. My pulse quickened. Slowly, I turned around. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. No one. Just rows of portraits watching from the walls. I laughed nervously at myself and continued walking. 3 steps later, the sound returned. One footstep. Then another. I spun around again. Nothing. The silence that followed felt almost heavier than the noise itself. By the time I reached the staircase, my heart was pounding. That was when I saw it. A figure standing on the second-floor balcony above me. Motionless. Watching. My breath caught. The person stood partly hidden in shadow. I could not make out a face. Only the outline of someone tall standing perfectly still. Then lightning flashed outside. The balcony was suddenly empty. I blinked. Gone. As if no one had ever been there. The next morning, I convinced myself exhaustion had played tricks on me. Until I opened my notebook during breakfast and found a folded piece of paper resting between the pages. A paper that had not been there the night before. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. There were only 4 words written in elegant handwriting. Stop looking for answers. I stared at the note for a long time after reading it. Stop looking for answers. The handwriting was elegant. Precise. Familiar in a way I could not explain. Whoever had written it had entered my room while I slept. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me angry. Someone wanted me frightened. Someone wanted me confused. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, I realized I was no longer willing to follow directions. That afternoon, I returned to the portrait with a new purpose. The hidden compartment had contained a drawing of a key. If the drawing existed, then the key itself had to exist somewhere inside the mansion. I spent hours examining frames, sculptures, and furniture throughout the gallery. Nothing. By late afternoon, frustration settled heavily on my shoulders. I was preparing to leave when a beam of sunlight slipped through the western windows and struck the portrait at an unusual angle. A small reflection flashed near the lower edge of the frame. I froze. Then I moved closer. Hidden among the carved vines decorating the wood was a tiny symbol I had missed before. A flower. Unlike the rest of the design, this flower could be pressed inward. My pulse quickened. I pushed it gently. Another click echoed from somewhere inside the wall. Not inside the frame. Inside the wall itself. I turned slowly. Across the room stood a tall bookcase filled with leather-bound volumes. One shelf had shifted outward by less than an inch. Barely noticeable. I crossed the room and carefully pulled. The section swung open. Behind it was a narrow compartment hidden within the stone wall. For several seconds I simply stared. Then I reached inside. My fingers closed around cold metal. A key. It was smaller than I expected. Old brass darkened by age. The top was engraved with the same flower symbol I had seen on the frame. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it. The drawing had been real. The key had been waiting here all along. But what did it open? I slipped it into my pocket and closed the compartment. The bookcase clicked back into place just as footsteps approached outside the gallery. The door opened. Adrian stepped inside. He stopped when he saw me standing near the shelves. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. "Working late again?" he asked. His voice remained calm. I nodded. "There is a lot to catalog." He studied me for a moment. Not suspicious. Not accusing. Simply observing. The way he always seemed to observe everything. You should be careful, Claire. My stomach tightened. Careful of what? A faint smile appeared and disappeared almost immediately. Old houses have a habit of revealing only part of their stories. Then he glanced toward the portrait before turning away. Good evening. After he left, I stood motionless in the center of the gallery. My hand rested against the key hidden inside my pocket. Because I suddenly understood something important. Adrian knew there were secrets inside this mansion. He knew someone had hidden them. And judging by the look in his eyes, he also knew I had just found one. That night, I waited until the mansion had settled into silence before taking the key from my desk drawer. Moonlight spilled through the windows, painting silver shapes across the floor. The brass key felt heavier than it should have. As though it carried more than metal and age. As though it carried expectation. I slipped it into my pocket and stepped into the corridor. The house seemed different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. Every hallway felt connected to a question. Every closed door felt like part of a puzzle. My footsteps echoed softly as I made my way toward the east wing. The forbidden corridor was empty. The black doors stood exactly where they always had, silent beneath the brass wall sconce. For several seconds, I simply stared at them. Then I pulled out the key. My pulse hammered in my ears. The engraving matched the flower symbol perfectly. This was not a coincidence. Whoever had hidden the drawing wanted this door opened. Slowly, I inserted the key into the lock. It fit. A soft metallic click broke the silence. I froze. Nothing happened. No alarms. No footsteps rushing toward me. Just silence. The lock had opened. I pushed gently against the door. It moved inward with surprising ease. Cool air drifted out. The smell of old wood and forgotten years filled the hallway. Beyond the doorway stretched another corridor. Dark. Quiet. Untouched. I stepped inside. The beam from my flashlight moved across dustless floors and perfectly maintained walls. That surprised me. Walter had described this area as closed, yet someone was clearly caring for it. Everything looked preserved. Waiting. I moved slowly from room to room. Each space appeared frozen in time. Furniture stood exactly where it had been placed decades ago. Books remained arranged neatly on shelves. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases. Fresh flowers. My flashlight paused on them. Someone had replaced them recently. Someone came here often. Then I reached the final room at the end of the corridor. The door stood slightly open. My heart accelerated. A strange feeling pulled me forward. The room beyond was unlike any other space in the mansion. It looked lived in. Personal. A writing desk stood beside the window. Family photographs lined the shelves. A pale blue blanket rested neatly across the bed. It felt as though the occupant had simply stepped out for a moment and might return at any second. I approached one of the photographs. A young woman smiled beside a lake beneath summer sunlight. The breath caught in my throat. It was her. The woman from the portrait. The resemblance was even stronger in real life. The same eyes. The same features. The same impossible familiarity. I picked up the frame. My hands trembled. On the back, written in elegant handwriting, were 3 words. Evelyn Moretti. The name struck me like a distant memory I could not quite reach. Then I noticed something else. Beside the photograph sat a leather journal. Dust-free. Recently handled. I opened the cover. The first page contained only a date from 20 years earlier and a single sentence written across the paper. If Claire ever finds this room, tell her the truth. For several seconds, I could not breathe. My eyes remained fixed on the sentence as though the words might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. They did not. My name was there. Claire. Written in ink that had dried decades ago. Slowly, I lowered myself into the chair beside the desk and turned the page. The journal belonged to Evelyn. Her handwriting flowed elegantly across the paper, each line neat and deliberate. The first entries described ordinary moments. Walks through the gardens. Summer dinners beneath lantern light. Books she loved. Music she listened to while rain tapped against the windows. The woman in the portrait slowly became real. Human. Yet the deeper I read, the stranger things became. Certain passages mentioned fears she never fully explained. References to secrets hidden inside the estate. Repeated warnings that some truths were dangerous when discovered too soon. Then I found a page marked by a pressed flower that had faded to pale gold over the years. My pulse quickened as I read. If you are reading this, it means the key worked. It also means you have begun asking the same questions I once asked. Questions about who you are and why you were brought here. A chill moved through me. Brought here. Not invited. Not hired. Brought here. The distinction felt important. I continued reading. There are people in this house who believe the past should remain buried. They are wrong. The truth belongs to those willing to face it. Especially Claire. My hands trembled slightly. How could she know my name? 20 years earlier, I had been a child living hundreds of miles away. I turned another page. Tucked between two entries was a photograph. The edges had yellowed with age. In the picture, Evelyn stood beside a younger Walter near the mansion fountain. Both were smiling. Behind them stood a little girl no older than 4. Blonde hair. Gray-blue eyes. My heart stopped. The photograph slipped slightly in my fingers. The child looked exactly like me. Not similar. Not reminiscent. Exactly. I stared until my vision blurred. That was impossible. I had never been here before. Had I? Memories flickered at the edge of my mind. Fragments. A stone fountain. A garden path. The distant sound of wind chimes. Images so faint they could have been dreams. Suddenly a floorboard creaked somewhere outside the room. I snapped my head toward the doorway. Silence followed. Then another sound. Soft footsteps moving away down the corridor. Someone had been outside. Listening. Watching. I quickly slipped the photograph into the journal and stood. The room no longer felt safe. Questions crowded my thoughts faster than I could process them. Who was Evelyn? Why did she know my name? Why did that child look exactly like me? And perhaps most importantly, who had been standing outside the door while I read her secrets? As I closed the journal, a folded envelope slid from the back cover and landed on the desk. Across the front, written in the same elegant handwriting, were 6 words that made my blood run cold. Open only when Adrian tells you everything. The envelope remained in my hands as dawn slowly brightened the windows of the hidden room. I should have left hours ago. Instead, I sat at Evelyn's desk surrounded by questions that seemed to multiply every time I found an answer. Open only when Adrian tells you everything. The message haunted me. Not because it was mysterious, but because it assumed something impossible. It assumed Adrian knew the truth. And if he knew the truth, then why had he said nothing? I slipped the envelope into my bag beside the journal and photograph. The sky outside was turning pale gray when I finally locked the room and retraced my steps through the corridor. Every shadow felt different now. Every portrait seemed to be watching me. By breakfast, I was exhausted. I barely touched my coffee. Walter noticed immediately. "Did you sleep well, Miss Bennet?" he asked. The question sounded innocent enough, but something in his expression made me wonder how much he knew. "Not particularly," I replied. His eyes lingered on me for a second longer than necessary before he nodded and returned to arranging silverware. The entire morning passed beneath a cloud of tension. I tried working in the gallery, but my concentration was gone. The photograph remained fixed in my mind. The little girl. The fountain. The impossible resemblance. Shortly after noon, the sound of an arriving vehicle echoed through the front grounds. That alone was unusual. During my time at the estate, very few visitors had come and gone. Curiosity pulled me toward one of the tall windows overlooking the circular driveway. A dark sedan rolled to a stop near the entrance. A man stepped out. He appeared to be in his late 50s. Expensively dressed. Silver hair. Sharp posture. Everything about him radiated confidence. Yet something about him immediately unsettled me. The front doors opened. Walter greeted him, though not warmly. The two exchanged a brief conversation before disappearing inside. A strange feeling settled over me. I had never seen Walter look uncomfortable before. An hour later, I was crossing the west corridor when I heard voices coming from a nearby study. The door was slightly open. I recognized Adrian's voice immediately. Calm. Controlled. The second voice belonged to the visitor. "You should have destroyed everything years ago," the man said quietly. My pulse quickened. "That was never my decision," Adrian replied. "Then you are making the same mistake she made." Silence followed. Then the visitor spoke again. "Does the girl know?" "Girl." My stomach tightened. They were talking about me. "No," Adrian answered. "Not yet." The visitor exhaled heavily. "Then you are running out of time." Footsteps approached the door. I moved away before either man could see me. My heart pounded all the way back to the gallery. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, I found a new entry slipped beneath my room door. No envelope. No signature. Just a single sheet of paper. 4 words written in familiar elegant handwriting. "He is not the enemy." I read the note at least 10 times before setting it down. He is not the enemy. 4 simple words. Yet they changed everything. Until that moment, I had spent days wondering whether Adrian was hiding the truth from me or protecting me from it. Now I was forced to consider a possibility I had been avoiding. What if he was doing both? The following morning arrived beneath heavy clouds. A steady wind moved through the trees outside my window, rattling branches against the glass. I carried the note with me throughout breakfast, folded carefully inside my pocket. Every time I looked across the dining room, I expected to see Adrian. He never appeared. Around noon, I found him in the library. The room occupied nearly an entire wing of the mansion. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched upward beneath a painted ceiling. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating thousands of books. Adrian stood near a ladder reviewing documents spread across a large oak table. For several moments, I simply watched him. There was something different about him when he believed no one was looking. The confidence remained, but the weight in his expression became visible. The exhaustion. The responsibility. The loneliness. He looked up and noticed me standing near the doorway. "You have questions," he said. It was not a question. "A few hundred." A faint smile appeared. "That sounds about right." I stepped closer. "Who was Evelyn?" The smile disappeared instantly. Silence filled the library. Somewhere outside, wind brushed against the windows. Adrian slowly set down the document he was holding. "Why are you asking about her?" I studied his face. "Because she knew my name before we ever met. Because she left messages for me. Because she left a photograph of a little girl who looks exactly like me." For the first time since I had arrived, genuine shock appeared in his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Shock. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he looked away. "You found the room?" "Yes." His shoulders lowered slightly as though he had been expecting this moment for years. I wondered how long it would take. "You knew it was there?" "Of course." The answer caught me off guard. "Then why hide it?" Adrian moved toward one of the windows overlooking the grounds. "Because some truths cannot be explained." They have to be discovered. I remembered the envelope still hidden inside my room. Open only when Adrian tells you everything. Then tell me, I said quietly. He remained silent for so long that I thought he might refuse. Finally, he turned toward me. His expression had changed completely. The walls were gone. The distance was gone. For the first time, he looked like a man carrying a burden he could no longer hold alone. Claire, he said softly, 20 years ago, Evelyn Moretti disappeared. My pulse quickened. Everyone believes they know what happened. They do not. The wind outside seemed louder now. The room itself felt smaller. Adrian took a slow breath. The reason you are here has nothing to do with paintings. My heart hammered inside my chest. Then why am I here? His eyes met mine. Because Evelyn spent the last year of her life trying to protect a child. He paused. And that child was you. The words seemed to drain the air from the library. I stared at Adrian, certain I had misunderstood him. A child. Me. The pieces scattered throughout the mansion suddenly felt heavier, as though they had been waiting for this moment to fall into place. That is impossible, I whispered. My voice barely sounded like my own. Adrian did not argue. He simply walked toward one of the shelves and removed a worn leather folder. The edges were faded from age. Carefully, he placed it on the table between us. I thought you would say that. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents. Newspaper clippings. Letters. Photographs. Years of carefully preserved history. The first photograph showed Evelyn sitting beside a fountain. The same fountain from the hidden room. In her arms was a little girl with blonde hair and gray-blue eyes. Me. Or someone who looked exactly like me. A date had been written on the back. 22 years earlier. My stomach tightened. Who was she to me? I asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. She raised you during the first years of your life. I looked up sharply. Raised me? He nodded. Not as a caretaker. Not as an employee. As family. Outside, clouds drifted across the sky, dimming the sunlight beyond the windows. The library seemed darker now. Smaller. Then why do I not remember her? Adrian's expression softened. Because memories from childhood are fragile. Especially after major changes. He moved to the window and folded his arms. When you were 4 years old, you left this estate. I felt dizzy. 4 years old. The age of the child in the photograph. The age of the distant memories that had been surfacing ever since my arrival. The fountain. The gardens. The wind chimes. Who took me away? Adrian closed his eyes briefly before answering. Evelyn arranged it herself. The answer stunned me. Why? Because she believed it was the only way to keep you safe. I sat in silence, trying to absorb the impossible reality unfolding around me. Every assumption I had carried about my life suddenly felt uncertain. My childhood. My adoption. My past. How much of it had been true? Adrian returned to the table and opened the folder to a specific page. A letter rested there beneath a protective sleeve. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Evelyn's. She wrote this shortly before you left, he said quietly. I never showed it to anyone. My eyes moved across the first lines. If Claire ever returns, tell her that leaving was never abandonment. It was love. The words blurred as emotion tightened my throat. I swallowed hard and continued reading. One sentence near the bottom caught my attention immediately. It was underlined twice. There is one final truth hidden inside this house. When Claire learns who she truly is, everything will finally make sense. My heartbeat quickened again. I looked up at Adrian. What does that mean? For the first time since entering the library, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. That, he said softly, is the question Evelyn spent her entire life trying to answer. That evening, the mansion felt quieter than it ever had before. Not peaceful. Expectant. As if the walls themselves were listening. I carried Evelyn's letter back to my room and read it again beneath the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Every sentence raised another question. Every answer revealed a deeper mystery. Somewhere beyond my window, wind moved through the trees. The branches brushed against one another with a sound that reminded me of whispered conversations. Around midnight, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Walter standing in the hallway. His usual calm expression seemed strained. "There is someone here to see Mr. Moretti," he said quietly. "At this hour?" I asked. Walter hesitated. It was not expected. Before I could ask another question, he excused himself and disappeared down the corridor. Sleep was impossible after that. Curiosity eventually drew me from my room. The mansion was dimly lit, most of the lights extinguished for the night. As I moved carefully along the upper balcony overlooking the grand entrance hall, voices drifted upward from below. One belonged to Adrian. The other belonged to the silver-haired visitor who had arrived days earlier. Their conversation was low, but fragments reached me through the silence. "She already knows too much," the man said. "She deserves the truth," Adrian replied. "The truth will change everything. That is exactly why she must hear it." Their voices faded as they entered another room. I remained frozen in place. The truth. Everyone seemed to know it except me. The next morning, rain covered the estate in a veil of gray. Shortly after breakfast, Adrian sent word asking me to meet him in the conservatory. I found him standing among towering glass walls surrounded by orchids and climbing ivy. Sunlight filtered weakly through the storm clouds overhead. He looked tired. Older somehow. As though the weight he carried had finally become visible. "There is something you need to see," he said. Without waiting for an answer, he led me through a series of corridors I had never visited before. Eventually we reached a narrow staircase hidden behind a paneled wall. At the top was a small attic room. Unlike the rest of the mansion, this space felt untouched. Personal. A single trunk sat near the window. Adrian knelt beside it and lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs, letters, and keepsakes carefully preserved through the years. He handed me one photograph. My breath caught immediately. Evelyn stood smiling beside a man I did not recognize. Between them stood a little girl. Me. But that was not what shocked me. The shock came from what the man was holding. A silver pendant shaped like a flower. The exact same flower engraved on the hidden key. "Who is he?" I whispered. Adrian looked toward the rain-covered glass. "That is the question everything has been leading to." My pulse quickened. "Then tell me." He was silent for several seconds. Then he pointed toward the inside lid of the trunk. I had not noticed the inscription before. Carved directly into the wood were 6 words. "The truth was never in the mansion. It was in you." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The words carved into the trunk seemed to echo through the small attic room. "The truth was never in the mansion. It was in you." Rain tapped softly against the window panes while I stared at the photograph in my hands. The man with the silver pendant. Evelyn beside him. The little girl between them. Me. Or at least the child I had once been. "Tell me everything," I said quietly. Adrian nodded. There was no hesitation left in him now. No distance. No carefully guarded silence. "The man in that photograph was your father," he said. My breath caught. He was a historian who spent years researching the origins of the Moretti estate. During his work, he uncovered documents that connected several families, including yours and Evelyn's, through generations of guardianship and trust. The pendant became a symbol passed down to the person chosen to protect that history. My eyes drifted back to the photograph. The flower. The same symbol hidden throughout the mansion. And Evelyn? I asked. Adrian looked toward the rain-covered glass. She was your godmother. When your parents died in an accident, she brought you here. She raised you as her own. She believed that one day you would be old enough to decide what to do with the truth yourself. Emotion tightened my throat. Every strange memory suddenly made sense. The fountain. The gardens. The wind chimes. They had never been dreams. They had been pieces of a childhood I had forgotten. Why was I sent away? I whispered. Adrian exhaled slowly. Because Evelyn became ill. She knew she would not have enough time. She wanted you to grow up free from expectations, free from obligations tied to family history. She arranged for your adoption and left instructions that everything be preserved until you returned. Tears blurred my vision. Not from sadness alone. From relief. For years, I had carried an invisible emptiness without understanding its source. Now, piece by piece, it was being filled. Adrian stepped closer and handed me the final envelope. The one I had carried since discovering the hidden room. You can open it now, he said softly. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single letter. Evelyn's handwriting flowed across the page. Claire, if you are reading this, then you found your way home. Not because someone told you where to go, but because your heart led you here. The mansion was never meant to keep secrets from you. It was meant to keep them for you. Your life belongs to you now. Choose your future freely. Remember only this, family is not defined by blood, history, or walls. Family is the people who protect your light when you forget how brightly you shine. By the time I reached the end, tears were slipping quietly down my cheeks. I looked up at Adrian. For the first time since arriving, the mansion no longer felt mysterious. It felt familiar. Warm. Like a place waiting patiently for someone to return. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the gardens below. The fountain shimmered in the distance. Somewhere, wind chimes sang softly in the afternoon breeze. And standing there beside the last pieces of my past, I finally understood that some journeys are not about discovering hidden rooms or forgotten secrets. They are about finding the part of yourself that was waiting to come home all along.